Such a punctual and orderly and courteous group of people. You're all very welcome to this very important meeting. I'd like to begin, if I might, very, very briefly by introducing myself, and I was asked to say a few words, what might be called opening reflections. But I'm not going to say more than a very few words, because we have some wonderful speakers, and we really want to make the most of everybody present and your own thoughts and contributions. So just to kick off, if I may, I must occasionally do what I'm told. I do have a few opening reflections. But I would like first to introduce myself very briefly, in case people don't know about my sort of background, and I'd rather you didn't. But all I say about myself is I'm a nurse and a social scientist by intention. That's what I thought I was doing with my life. I'm a baroness by astonishment, and I have to tell you it's some sense of humour of some divine entity up there, because you become a baroness, as I'm sure you know, by being appointed to the House of Lords. And I wasn't into politics, I don't much like politics, and I was so much not in that world, I was actually the first baroness I'd ever met. Never met one before. You wake up one morning, you see a baroness looking you out of the bathroom window, and you say, well, it's quite a shock, but also, of course, a huge privilege. And I thought how best I could use that privilege of being able to speak in one of the houses of the British Parliament. And it occurred to me it is a wonderful place to be a voice for the voiceless, to speak for people who cannot speak for themselves. And that is how I've tried to use this great privilege. And as part of that, I should perhaps put my own religious cards on the table. I'm a Christian, but we have a biblical mandate for our Christian faith, which is to heal the sick, feed the hungry, speak for the oppressed, not just the Christian hungry, the Christian oppressed, the Christian sick. We have to be available for all, unconditionally, and without compromise, just to be available, because the essential gospel of love means that love is unconditional. Therefore, I established a small NGO called HEART, Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust, to work for victims of oppression and persecution, very largely those off the radar screen of the major aid organisations trapped behind closed borders. And we work in that context. And it's a huge privilege to visit, to stand alongside, to work and speak for oppressed and persecuted peoples of any faith or none. For example, we may speak for Christians who are having a rough time at the moment in Nigeria. In Sudan, I've been many, many times to Sudan and South Sudan, often crossing in illegally, where, for example, in Blue Nile and in the Nuba Mountains at the moment, there's horrendous oppression and persecution going on. And it's our privilege to work alongside our Muslim traditional believer and Christian friends there. In Burma, spent my time crossing borders illegally to be with the ethnic nationals in Burma, and particularly, for example, the Buddhist people of Shan State, the Rohingya Muslims, and the Christians in Kachin State. But back here at home, in my work here in the UK, I greatly value working closely with friends and researchers, people of various faiths, and amongst those this evening, I thank our Muslim friend Muhammad and his friends who've helped to organise this evening. But as we strive together, and on the Interfaith Religious group, the all-party parliamentary group, I'm happy to say we have members of a wide range of faith communities striving together to challenge injustice, extremism, including religious extremism. And again, our work is unconditional, and we don't see gender, ethnicity, nor religion as any obstacle in caring for each other, speaking for each other in need. Just on my personal agenda, I have, for example, a private member's bill seeking to address religiously sanctioned gender discrimination. To practice that is quite a mouthful to get out, but religiously sanctioned gender discrimination, which is causing much suffering to women in the UK today, as well as posing a quasi-parallel legal system threatening a fundamental principle of liberal democracy, one law for all. Remember, what I spoke about today was looking at people who do suffer some of the consequences of marriage, a religiously sanctioned marriage when it's not also a civil marriage, and they're left very vulnerable, and if they need to know what are the implications of not having a legal marriage in this country. And on the wider horizons, we live in an extraordinary time of injustice for persecuted minorities around the world. I think it would be fair to say that Christianity is at the present time one of the most persecuted faiths of all, but of course we are deeply concerned, as I've mentioned, about those of other faith communities, the Ahmadiyas, the Baha'is, the Buddhists, as I've mentioned, the Hindus, anyone who is suffering persecution. We, I believe, have a responsibility to speak for. We have freedom in this country. Freedom is so precious. We should never take it for granted, and I believe we have an obligation to use our freedom on behalf of those who do not have theirs. And I must admit, as a Christian, I'm quite often somewhat disappointed by the lukewarm response of our comfortable Christian Western Church to the plight of people suffering persecution around the world today. And therefore it's extremely heartening to see good friends from other faiths, including those around this table today, coming forward to join hands with those of us who are trying to be a voice for the voiceless and to share a deep concern for widespread suffering wherever it may be occurring. We cannot fight persecution, religious discrimination and extremism overseas, I believe also, if we're too afraid to tackle these questions here at home in the UK. I believe, for example, we cannot speak up for the persecuted Ahmadiyya communities in Pakistan if we're too fearful to challenge extremist bullying or discrimination against Ahmadiyyas here in Britain, or if we collude with others in their exclusion in appeasement of the prejudice. And I think it would be wrong of us to ask other countries to do more, for example, to deal with honour-related violence and oppression of women if we allow such abuses to obtain ground here in Britain. So it is a comprehensive, a holistic challenge that we face. Therefore, it is my great privilege to work together with my very dear friend, my Muslim friend, a researcher, and other colleagues and friends of different faiths to tackle these challenges. One such project, I think, is a very exciting project. I think it was your idea, Mohammed. I think it's a brilliant idea in my view. It's called the Religious Freedom Trustmark, which aims to promote common values across all faith-based charities, grounded in the European Union, sorry about that, Lord Pearson, but the European Union guidelines on the promotion and protection of freedom of religion and belief. In Europe, we do share a lot of values, even we may not share the same political commitments. But we are endeavouring to build together a nation where human rights and freedom of belief are respected, not extremism, discrimination, and the misuse of power. So it is a huge honour and privilege for me to chair this discussion today with very good friends, to welcome all of you here. And in a moment, I'll be happy to introduce the good friends who will be speaking. But I've been told there's a slightly embarrassing, very short little thing to be accomplished before I move on with the meeting. And I think I now have to sit down in the chair for a moment before I get up and introduce our speakers. So anyhow, those are my opening reflections. Thank you.
Very good. Hold on, Baroness.
This was not on the agenda when I agreed it.
Thank you, Baroness Cox. I'm here today on behalf of Dr. Iftikhar Ayaz, Chair of the Board of Trustees of the All Faith Network, and he's asked me to apologise that he's not able to attend in person here today. He's had to leave for Asia on a human rights mission, but sends his regards and appreciation for all involved with putting on this conference, as well as the attendees who took the time to be here tonight. I know he and the Ahmadiyya Muslim community warmly appreciate the considerable work done by the All-Party Parliamentary Committee on International Religious Freedom. Baroness Cox is a prominent member of the APPG on International Religious Freedom and the founder of the Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust, through which she has worked tirelessly and with great courage to defend and care for persecuted and marginalised Christian and other faith communities around the world. It is therefore particularly fitting for the All Faiths Network as a body committed to promoting religious freedom and religious equality for all without discrimination or prejudice to honour Lady Cox's excellent work. On behalf of Dr. Ayaz and the All Faiths Network, I would therefore like to present Baroness Cox with this plaque. We present this by the All Faiths Network to Baroness Cox of Queensbury in recognition of her tireless contributions to the cause of freedom of religion at the House of Lords on this 12th day of November 2013. Thank you.
Well, I was not expecting that, but thank you with all my heart. I cannot think of any award which means more to me in terms of what it stands for. And it's wonderful to share what it stands for with everyone who's come here this afternoon, because we all share this commitment, this passion. So this is really emblematic and symbolic for all of us. But thank you so much. I will treasure it, my family will treasure it, and it is very, very precious. Thank you. Without further ado, because we have some wonderful speakers, I asked all our speakers if they wished me to give any form of introduction for them, and they said no. I don't know if people, have you had an agenda with the have our visitors? Oh, And thank you very much. Because when you have the agenda, the programme, you will see who our speakers are and a brief summary of each of them. And I said, did they want me to add to or to amend their little CVs that are there for each of them? And they said, no, they were far too flattering. And I said, they cannot be too flattering because every one of the speakers is one of my heroes. But I'm not going to waste time adding. You can read the essential information about them. It's more important to listen to what they have to say, and they will speak for themselves. So I'm not going to reiterate the biographies. They're there. And now it is my enormous pleasure and privilege to ask our first keynote speaker, Mr. Sam Westrop from Gateston Institute, kindly to address us.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. Baroness Cox, thank you very much for sharing onto the All Faiths Network. Thank you very much for organising. 2 weeks ago, a man named Chowdhury Muinuddin was sentenced to death in Bangladesh, in Udcentia, for his alleged role in the abduction and murder of 18 innocent people. Now, Mr. Muinuddin was best known here in Britain for his charitable work, his role in the Muslim community, and most importantly, and why we're here tonight, his interfaith work. He was director of the multi-faith healthcare chaplaincy unit. He regularly spoke at Interfaith Week events for various interfaith umbrella groups. He was a go-to person for interfaith. Now, how is it that a man alleged to have committed such appalling crimes all the way back in 1971 can be held up as a role model for interfaith dialogue, someone who can lead the way in bringing together people of different faiths and the ideas that bind us all together? Well, actually, it's not so far-fetched when you look at the rest of the network. And that is what, over the last few months, with the help of some of the people here tonight, with certainly sort of an interfaith team, we've been looking at the people and groups that make up the Interfaith Network, the people that perhaps shouldn't be there when it comes to dialogue, people we perhaps legitimise as representative of the Muslim community without the Muslim community having any say. Now, I'm going to give you just a few examples. If all of you have picked up a copy of the report we've recently produced, there should be one on your seat. If you don't have one, there are more by the door you can take at the end. I'm going to give you some perhaps of the gritty detail, and the other speakers will give you perhaps perspective and hope and optimism. So bear with me. First of all, it's undeniable that the vast majority of Muslim groups in this country involve themselves in interfaith. An exceedingly large amount of the ones who dominate the interfaith scene are Islamist organisations, are organisations with links to the Muslim Brotherhood and Jamaat Islami in particular, but it doesn't just stop there. The Muslim Council of Britain, I think we've probably all heard of. For those that haven't, back in 2009, the Labour government cut off contact after its then Secretary General, Dawud Abdullah, signed the Istanbul Declaration, a document that advocated attacks on British troops and Jewish communities around the world. The Muslim Council of Britain has a long history of promoting extremist speakers and being involved with extremist people. It has a periodic boycott of Holocaust Memorial Day. Admittedly, in the last few years, it appears to have got better, at least on the face of it. But for anyone who saw Andrew Neil's widely discussed interview with the Muslim Council of Britain chairman last week, you saw that perhaps the Muslim Council of Britain is simply getting better at hiding its extremist tendencies. Now, interfaith is the perfect method for Islamist groups to put a pleasant face on their activities, to sanitize their organisations and to legitimise themselves. And I think that's the key word here, legitimise themselves as genuine and sincere, fit and proper representatives of the Muslim community. The Muslim Council of Britain is one of the leading interfaith organisations in this country. It's part of the Interfaith Network for the United Kingdom, one of the largest umbrella groups. It regularly takes part in interfaith events across the country. When you want to run an interfaith event with the Muslim community, you go to the Muslim Council of Britain. And yet, only 4% of British Muslims recognise the Muslim Council of Britain as representing their views. And so interfaith allows Islamist groups with links to whether Jamaat al-Islami, this violent Bangladeshi group abroad, or the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East, it allows these Islamist groups to impose themselves upon the Muslim community. In a way, this is the real Islamophobia. We don't hear Muslims have a choice about who they dialogue with, because they never get to do this dialogue. The dialogue is done by Islamist groups imposing their agenda and their ideas on a Muslim community. And the extant interfaith organizations, Jews, Christians, Hindus, everyone, do not have anyone else to deal with at the moment, and that is one of the most crucial things. Now, they aren't the only group. The Islamic Foundation, another Jamaat al-Islami group based in Leicester, who in 2003, 2 of their trustees were found to be on a UN list of people with ties to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Today, they're a leading publisher of Maududi, the great Jamaat al-Islami ideologue, as well as Sayyid Qutb, the Muslim Brotherhood ideologue. These people are at the forefront of modern Islamism, and they have dominated the interfaith sector because it gives them a chance to do something. It gives them a chance to promote their ideas in a particular way. Now, what's much more interesting is what is the response then of the interfaith network, of the interfaith groups that exist in the United Kingdom. The vast majority of them are taxpayer funded. This mostly takes place through something called the Interfaith Network for the United Kingdom, a vast umbrella group that takes hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money each year. There's no accountability for this organisation. No one has really monitored what kind of people they're working with, what kind of groups they're talking to until now. And I think it's a very important step that for the first time people from so many different faiths are coming together to discuss this question. Now, the Interfaith Network has itself, this umbrella group, has a long history of appointing extremists to its board. Last year, the co-chairman of the Interfaith Network was a man called Manazir Arzan, who was personally responsible for coordinating the riots against Salman Rushdie after the fatwa was issued. He later went on to endorse the fatwa and say this is absolutely just from an Islamic point of view. And yet it was deemed that this man was somehow a suitable representative to conduct interfaith dialogue here in the United Kingdom, to be the face of interfaith dialogue here in the United Kingdom. It doesn't stop there. The Interfaith Network's committee, its executive committee, includes representatives from the Deobandi sect, this ultra-conservative group. It includes representatives from a number of Muslim Brotherhood and Jamaat al-Islami organizations. In other words, moderate Muslims do not have a say. The Muslim community does not have a say in how they are represented and how dialogue is done. For a more perhaps succinct look at why the Islamist groups do that, I would quite like just to read you very quickly this quote from a man called Haytham al-Haddad, who is a preacher and a number of organizations involved with taxpayer-funded interfaith groups. He works with groups like the Islamic Education and Research Academy and the Al-Muntada Trust. All of these groups, those two groups in particular, are part of something called London Citizens, again, which receives taxpayers' money to promote dialogue between different faith groups. They ultimately benefit from the legitimacy and public funds that taxpayer funds provide. Now, the quote from al-Haddad, I feel, is very telling. Let me just read this to you. Of course, as Muslims, we believe that this coexistence cannot take place unless they are living under the umbrella of Islam, under the system of Islam. We have to differentiate between a situation of necessity that we are dealing with and the ultimate aim in an ideal situation. Now we are talking about minorities living in the West, so we have to provide them with a workable solution in the short run. And as we said, these visions and strategies are meant to be for a short run, means within 50 years, something like that. It is not the far ultimate aim of Muslims, because the far ultimate aim for Muslims is to have Islam governing the whole world, Islamization of the whole globe. This is the ultimate aim of any Muslim and of all communities, Muslim communities. But we are not talking about that at the moment, we are talking about the immediate goals. So, in terms of immediate goals, we need this peaceful coexistence, and they claim that they are promoting it, and we need to take it from there. Around the time he said this, he also addressed a sermon at the Al-Muntada Mosque, where he described Jews as apes and pigs. This is not the voice of someone you would want to conduct interfaith dialogue with. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Even the groups and organisations we look at in the report, they barely touch on the it's not a comprehensive look. There's a lot more to be found, a lot more to be discussed. What is particularly worrying from our position is not that the existent interfaith networks tolerate the presence of these extremists. It's that they then exclude smaller faith groups. They then exclude genuine moderates who want to advance their version of Islam. Their version of Islam as a private faith and not as a totalitarian ideology. The particularly strong example of this, of course, is the Ahmadiyya Muslims, whom some of which we have with us tonight. We have direct examples of both officials from the publicly funded interfaith networks, as well as the government itself, the Department for Communities and Local Government, endorsing the exclusion of Ahmadiyya Muslims because they don't want to upset the existent Islamist groups, the Muslim Council of Britain, the Islamic Foundation, all these people. Now, it's one thing to perhaps believe that you can engage with what some people refer to as moderate Islamism. It's one thing to believe that and say that, well, look, these are the best people we've got to talk to, so we'll speak to them. It is another thing entirely to exclude a faith group in the name of dialogue. Now, everything about the interfaith network and the interfaith movement in this country as it exists is anti-dialogue. And one of the problems of talking about the entire questions that one is accused of perhaps of bigotry or perhaps of being anti-interfaith dialogue oneself. Well, actually, I think the lack of candid discussion lies entirely with the interfaith movements in this country. Not only, of course, do they not want to send representatives to discuss these issues here tonight, not only will they exclude certain sects and faith, not only does government, by the way, refuse to release copies of the correspondence between them and the interfaith networks. All of this points to a thoroughly anti-dialogue stance. Nothing points to openness. Nothing points to us as a desire to reach truth, to any aim that interfaith proclaims to have is certainly not being realised. Now, I think there's a lot to be said about the efficacy, about the benefits of interfaith dialogue. There's also a lot to be discussed about the efficacy of the current approach. But I would look at it like this. Interfaith dialogue as it exists claims to want to bring people together, to bring communities together. At the moment, all this is doing is driving people apart, and it's doing that by legitimising extremists as representative of a community that doesn't necessarily want these people to lead them. I propose that here tonight, this is the finest example of interfaith dialogue we can come across, because this is, here we have people of all different faiths from across the political and religious spectrums. We've come here to say we're working together to reject the forces that drive us apart and to truly bring us together under one idea, under one peaceful, cohesive idea. I'm going to stop now, as I'm far more depressing when it comes to these things. I think the other speakers have a lot more to say from a sort of more optimistic perspective, but thank you. Thank you.
Not depressing at all, Sam. Only the truth will make us free, and it's very refreshing to hear the truth. So thank you so much for that. You've got two more speakers and then two discussants, and open up for Q&A. I'm happy to say that Khalil Yusuf, you're prepared to say something tonight for this as a speaker as well as a far too kind presenter. So we'd love to hear from you, and you can read, you've all got the bios of our speakers tonight, very eminent. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Respected Chairperson, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honour and privilege for me to be invited to address such a distinguished audience on the topic of extremism. Whilst extremism takes many forms, it is the descriptive Islamic extremism which really generates the strongest opinions. Most will agree that extremism extends beyond the so-called jihadists. But in truth, I struggle to find pieces of modern-day writing which discuss extremism without using the word Islam. Copious caricatures of crazed, one-eyed, hook-wielding Islamic clerics proliferate a bizarre spectacle of Islam. Critics like Dawkins and Appleby go even further. They say that wars the world over are rooted in religion, and that religion is a potential threat to human survival. Ferociously intellectual as they are, I don't think that they are correct. The bombastic claim that any of God's religions are predominant cause of war, discord and violence simply ignores the reality of history. Empirical evidence tells us that the non-religious nation-state has been by far the world's most prolific purveyor of violence. The 20th century alone has witnessed Nazi death camps, Stalinist and Maoist purges, the Khmer Rouge killing fields, and the Rwandan genocide, all of which were secular and state-sponsored affairs. These atrocities, which have killed millions, vastly outrank anything that can be laid at the feet of religion, whether that be Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, or Sikhism. On the contrary, religion has contributed significantly to peace and justice movements across the world, with countless individual and organisational acts of charity. The work of the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, and Humanity First are well-known examples. So why, despite those facts, is religion now so inextricably linked to extremism? It's a serious question to which there are no easy answers. I have three prominent proposals. First, politicised religious clerics have in some cases managed to amass large followings, poisonously influencing their followers to commit atrocities by using religion as a tool of oppression. They have done so purely for political convenience. It is so much easier for self-appointed clerics to maintain the support of a relatively uneducated electorate by promising them divine intervention and heaven instead of realpolitik. Second, inequalities between people and nations are being exacerbated, with increasingly unjust outcomes being imposed upon weaker parties. Third, a more powerful, opinionated, and instant media publicises those stories that facilitate its commercial aims. But let's not hide from the obvious. It is a difficult thing for a Muslim to publicly accept that Islam's image is in bad shape. Well, let's do that, I admit it. Islam's image is in bad shape. And I also accept that there are some that misrepresent Islamic teaching. Whether it is because of the horrific terrorist atrocities that we have recently seen in Kenya, the tragic sectarian conflicts in Syria, or the extreme clerics who on the one hand blame terrorist groups and on the other hand support them, Islam and an innate apprehension of everything Muslim seem to come hand in hand. The sad fact is that unfortunately some so-called Islamic groups and certain others have depicted Islam as uncivilized, extremist, belligerent, and a bellicose religion, with Islam's very name leading to the false picturization of swords and bombings. Some people are understandably fearful, and let's be honest, fear is not the fault of the frightened. Equally, media illustrations do not reasonably characterize Islam. Islam, translated into English, means peace. I would argue, judge Islam on its teachings and the practices of its founder. Judge people on what they do. To blame Islam and the Prophet Muhammad for the misguided actions of the few extremist crackpots who associate with Islam is the same as blaming Washington's Second Amendment for some of America's crazed gunmen. Both equally preposterous. So let's set the record straight. Extremism is not sanctioned by Islam. The Holy Quran says in chapter 2, verse 257, there shall be no compulsion in matters of religion, and that means non-religion as well. It also says in chapter 10, verse 100, that if God had wanted to enforce a unified belief, he would have done so, rather than intended freedom of religion. In fact, chapter 109 makes clear that there should be no force in belief. It says, for you your religion, for me my religion. The Holy Quran even mentions a duty to protect churches and synagogues and mosques, which was the practice of the Holy Prophet Muhammad himself. The Holy Quran also says, and let not the people's enmity incite you to act otherwise than with justice. Be always just, because that is nearer to righteousness. Against that backdrop, it is contemptible for a Muslim to engage in any form of terrorism or sectarianism. Nor can they seek the destruction of places where the worship of God exists, no matter to which faith they are assigned. The appropriate reaction for Muslims who have a grievance is not to engage in violence or unruliness, but to engage peacefully and decisively. His Holiness Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the worldwide spiritual leader of the almost 100 million strong Ahmadiyya Muslim community of which I am a member, persuasively argues in the House of Commons, the European Parliament, on Capitol Hill, and in leadership establishments worldwide, that to establish global peace and harmony, all people should display respect for one another and all religions and beliefs. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community believes and practices that it is the Islamic duty of a Muslim to be loyal to the country in which they live, and, except if Ahmadiyya Muslims are instructed not to pray, for instance, to be obedient to those in authority.
Equally, Ahmadi Muslims do not respond to extremism with violence, street protests or disorder, which, because of its potential harm to the nation, is equally prohibited. Ahmadi Muslims' worldwide practice is that propagating true Islam is not to be accomplished by force, but through winning over hearts with love and affection and exemplary behaviour. The community's half-century-old motto of love for all, hatred for none has become a striking, memorable and profoundly evocative representation of Islam Ahmadiyyat, defining its global community work during its 124-year existence. The service of mankind through charitable works, national peace symposiums and multicultural and multi-faith engagement that this slogan oversees is a fanlight that defines what it means to be Muslim. How then does the Ahmadiyya Muslim community promote interfaith harmony? And by that I mean amongst people of religion and amongst people of no religion. It has 5 key limbs. 1. All beliefs, thoughts and conscience, whether Islamic or otherwise, must conform to the underlying Islamic principle of not permitting the use of force and coercion in any manner as an instrument in resolving intersectarian and interreligious strife. That means the choice of religion, the freedom to profess, propagate, practice and exercise or to change one's belief must be protected absolutely. 2. Even if religions or beliefs cannot agree on what they define as being the truth, all religions and beliefs should conform to the Islamic principle of showing respect and reverence to the founders and holy personages of other faiths. In pursuing this, one does not have to compromise their principles. Rather, as a matter of human rights, the right of every human being that his religious sensibilities and sentiments should not be violated must be recognised. 3. The sanctity of religious dialogue must be maintained, and exchanges of views about religion or irreligion must not be condemned as acts of sabotage of religious peace. It is the manner of dialogue which, if wrong, that should be condemned, not the dialogue itself. Blasphemy in Islam does not warrant man-made punishment. 4. Interfaith conferences on the pattern introduced by the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in the earlier part of the last century, and events such as this, which are continuing to this day, should be widely encouraged and promoted. These should include speakers from all faiths who should highlight the positives of their faith without maligning others. And 5. Cooperation in all good plans and schemes for the mutual benefit of mankind must be promoted and encouraged. For instance, philanthropic projects should be undertaken jointly between Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Jews. Equally, at a global level, nation-states must also maintain a most sacred of trusts. Nations must ensure that justice is done and seen to be done, taking a consistent approach to foreign policy, considering just outcomes beyond national borders, being compassionate, punishing wrongdoing consistently, respecting and enforcing the inalienable human rights which every country in the world has subscribed to, all form part of that journey. But there is one other important thing, because despite the media frenzy we see around religion, the fact is that more people in the world believe in God than do not. And so, as we in the West move towards the promotion of universal human rights and an almost universal equality and tolerance of secular views, as a truly liberal society, we must also ensure that this does not lead to an opposite intolerance of traditional religious views, because society cannot flourish with one perspective alone. Society must not lose its freedom of conscience, and governments like those in Pakistan who have criminalised the existence of Ahmadi Muslims, arrested thousands and allowed thousands of unpunished killings of Ahmadi Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and indeed Sunni and Shia Muslims, should not tell us what we have to think about religion, because to allow that leads to a dictatorship of thought which undermines the very inalienability of human rights unanimously pledged by the world through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Sections 295 and 298 of Ordinance 20, which codify into law religious apartheid, must be repealed. Finally, to those who say that peaceful means cannot secure a just outcome, I direct you to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. To those that say non-violence cannot lead to freedom from oppression, I refer you to Mahatma Gandhi. And to those who say Islam is a religion of a bygone past, I point you to the 204 countries in which the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is established and flourishing, the millions of pounds it has raised for charity, and the honest representation it gives of Islam. And it is this practical example of peace, loyalty, respect, and universal brotherhood that has proved so magnetic for the 500,000 people that joined the Ahmadiyya Muslim community last year. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Great thoughts speak only to the thoughtful mind, but great actions speak to all mankind." That is a challenge not just for governments and the media, but for every right-thinking person who wishes for a freer, more tolerant and extremist-free future for us and our children. May God make it so. Thank you for listening.